Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today we are wrestling with, well, one of literature's most profound critiques of faith, freedom, and human nature. Fyodor Dostoyevsky's vision of the Grand Inquisitor.
A truly scorching vision.
Absolutely. This whole deep dive is based on Ivan Karamazov's chilling and provocative poem. It describes a 90-year-old Spanish cardinal who arrests Christ himself upon his silent return to 16th century Seville.
And we're going to unpack the Inquisitor's staggering argument, which is essentially that Christ gave humanity this terrible, unbearable gift free will.
Right. And that the only path to, guaranteed collective happiness requires absolute control, constant deception, and a total rejection of God's idealism.
This conversation is, at its heart, a philosophical war. It's waged over the fate of man's soul.
And it's all framed around these core arguments of bread, miracles, and authority. It really pits this radical spiritual freedom against a kind of pragmatic atheistic certainty.
It is maybe the greatest literary defense of organized utilitarian tyranny ever written.
That's a huge claim. Why do you say that?
Because it's delivered by a character who suffers profoundly while embracing his role as the master deceiver. Our source, this extract from the brothers Karamazov, is just framed so brilliantly. It's a debate between the intellectual atheist, Ivan,
And his deeply mystic brother, Alyosha.
exactly.
Hi.
And Ivan uses this poem not just to critique, say, the Catholic Church, though it is a brutal satire on modern theology, especially the Jesuits and the Inquisition,
Of course.
but he uses it to explore the psychological limits of human freedom itself.
So our mission today is to really try and understand the Inquisitor's logic, which is just so cynical, but also paradoxically self-sacrificing.
It forces you to confront a terrifying question.
One that's just as relevant today, right? In our age of data and guaranteed security.
Completely. Does knowledge and the burden of freedom that comes with it inevitably lead to such unbearable suffering that a comfortable, managed lie is actually preferable to a challenging, maybe even catastrophic truth?
We're going right to the heart of Dostoevsky's vision of human weakness versus these divine demands. Okay, so let's unpack this setup. Let's see how Ivan primes his brother Alyosha for this terrible indictment.
So the first thing to remember is Ivan is a materialist. He's an atheist.
Right.
Yet he is the one who chooses this intensely religious, mystical framework for his argument.
Which tells you something immediately.
It tells you the conversation is not about proving or disproving God's existence. It's about critiquing the world God created
Yeah.
and, the demands he placed upon it.
And he intentionally places his poem in the 16th century. He reminds us this was an age when poets commonly made denizens and powers of higher worlds descend on earth.
So it's a kind of fantasy, but a plausible one for the time.
Exactly. It's a liminal space, an era of fervent religious devotion. But Ivan also notes that this is when the first germs of doubt had begun to sprout in Christendom.
You've got the Protestant Reformation, Luther denying miracles.
Right. The whole era is defined by this tension between absolute unquestioning faith and the dawning of skepticism.
Precisely. And to really deepen that atmosphere, Ivan frames the whole discussion by citing an older convent poem, The Travels of the Mother of God Among the Damned.
And this isn't just a throwaway detail, is it? It feels like it establishes the theological stakes right away.
Not at all. It's critical.
The section describing this older poem is haunting. The Mother of God visits hell. She sees souls sinking in a burning lake. And Ivan highlights this one line about suffering that he finds of extraordinary profundity.
Yes, the souls who sink so low that they can no longer rise to the surface are said to be forgotten by God.
They fade out from the omniscient memory.
Just think about the weight of that concept for a moment. For an atheist like Ivan, this idea that even God, the all-knowing, unchanging one, could forget a soul, just reduce it to oblivion, that's the ultimate expression of despair.
It suggests a limit to divine mercy or maybe even divine consistency.
It sets up a contrast, you see. If God can forget the damned because of the sheer scale of their suffering, then maybe human authority, the Inquisitor, is justified in creating a manageable, forgettable, suffering-free existence here on Earth.
So Ivan is using a dark theological concept to justify his own radical atheistic humanism.
The tension is just palpable. 15 centuries have now passed since Christ's promise to return. Faith remained blind faith to lull the trusting heart. But you can feel the impatience, the suffering, the doubt bubbling up.
And then he arrives.
And where does he choose for him to arrive?
Seville. The heart of the Spanish Inquisition, a setting defined by the most severe manifestation of earthly religious authority and violence.
Ivan describes it so vividly, the sheer scale of the executions. Upwards of 100 wicked heretics are being roasted in a magnificent auto da fe.
Ad majorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God.
An auto da fe, an act of faith, was this huge public spectacle. The condemned were marched, judged, and yes, often burned. It was a massive civic and religious event.
So the air in Seville, as Dostoyevsky describes it, is thick with the smell of burning human sacrifice. All of it judgment conducted in God's name.
That's the context. Absolute, terrifying temporal power exerted through calculated religious fear.
And against this backdrop of flaming stakes, Christ arrives, silently, unannounced, no fanfare.
But the people recognize him instantly. They rush towards him, propelled by some irresistible force.
He moves through them radiating boundless compassion. The description is key here, isn't it? Warm rays of light, wisdom, and power beam forth from his eyes.
It's not a theological deduction. It's visceral, primal. This immediate love for the perfect suffering God returning to his people.
And he doesn't waste any time proving who he is. He performs immediate, undeniable miracles.
Heals a man blind from birth.
But the most dramatic moment is when a funeral procession pauses and the mother cries out in desperation.
And Christ stands before the small coffin of a 7-year-old child and whispers, Talitha Kumi.
A direct biblical reference.
Exactly. And the child rises, holding her little bouquet of white roses. This is pure, unrestrained divine intervention. It's undeniable proof.
And the crowd just explodes. A terrible commotion rages, shouting and weeping in ecstatic joy.
And right there, at that peak of ecstatic worship, Ivan introduces the pivot point of his entire argument.
The Cardinal Grand Inquisitor appears.
A monumental figure. Nearly 90, tall, gaunt, stern, his eyes flashing like 2 fiery sparks. He's the man who just ordered that massive auto da fe.
And he sees the resurrection. He sees the miracle.
But his reaction isn't worship. It's not fear. It's this grim, absolute determination.
He slowly raises a single finger
And commands his guards to arrest Christ.
And this is the moment that, in the Inquisitor's eyes, utterly condemns humanity. After witnessing a divine resurrection, the ecstatic, thronging crowds.
They fall into dead silence. They scatter.
They allow the guards to lay sacrilegious hands upon the stranger and lead him away. Not a single person protests.
The source highlights this immense, almost hypnotic power he holds. It says, such is his power over the well-disciplined, submissive, and now trembling people that the thick crowds immediately give way, without one breath of protest.
They just bow their heads to the ground. He blesses them and moves on.
This immediate silent submission of people who, moments ago, were witnessing the ultimate act of God to the temporal, fearful authority of the cardinal that establishes the Inquisitor's core thesis.
That, given a direct choice between divine freedom and absolute order, human weakness chooses order, security, every single time.
It's a devastating critique of human nature. It suggests our deepest craving isn't for divinity or truth,
but for relief. Relief from the unbearable responsibility of choice.
And so Christ is led away to a narrow, gloomy cell in the Holy Tribunal, and the stage is set for the real confrontation.
The Inquisitor enters the dungeon alone, holding a dark lantern. He looks at Christ and begins this almost seamless monologue. He's not addressing him as God, but as a dangerous idealist.
And his first words are just this chilling assertion of dominance. Nay, answer not, be silent. And what couldst thou say? I know but too well thy answer.
So why is that command for silence so critical? It seems like it's more than just controlling the scene.
Oh, it's the entire philosophical defense of the church. That's the subtlety of it. The Inquisitor knows that Christ's power lies not in armies, but in a new word, a new truth, a new revelation.
And any new word would interfere.
It would interfere with the freedom for which thou hast so stoutly stood up in the first place. The church's entire project for the last 15 centuries rests on the existing, defined revelation. A new miracle, a new truth, would just confuse everything again.
So he's saying, we've already cleaned up your mess and you're threatening to undo it all.
Precisely. The ultimate message is that the church has already accomplished its task, and it did so in Christ's name. They claim all authority was implicitly handed over to them.
Everything was given over by thee to the Pope, and everything now rests with him alone. Thou hast no business to return and thus hinder us in our work.
And the heart of that work was neutralizing what they saw as the catastrophic gift of free will.
The Inquisitor sees this freedom of choice as an unbearable, unnecessary burden. He says, never was there anything more unbearable to the human race than personal freedom. I mean, that sounds insane to a modern audience obsessed with liberty.
But he insists the masses have willingly, and of their own free will, delivered this freedom, this terrible burden, to the church.
And he defends this as a great service.
He argues that people feel fully sure and satisfied of their freedom only after they've handed it over. The Inquisitor believes the church has, for the first time, actually allowed for serious thought about human happiness.
Because Christ's idealism ignored the fundamental flaw of human nature.
That man is born a rebel, and can rebels be ever happy? Rebellion, for Dostoyevsky, is innate when you give people freedom, and rebellion always leads to misery.
So this sets up the central theological critique. The Inquisitor believes Christ was an idealist who loved humanity, but loved them too much ideally. He didn't understand their pitiful, weak nature. He demanded they be gods when they were just children.
And this failure, the Inquisitor claims, was identified and warned against in the wilderness by the terrible and wise spirit, the spirit of negation.
Right, the devil.
But he surprisingly praises the wisdom of the three temptations, not as a trial from evil, but as emanating from the eternal and the absolute. He says they summarize the whole future history of our world and of mankind.
That is a staggering philosophical claim. He's saying the devil's questions were the most profound framework for understanding human history ever conceived.
The Inquisitor sees Christ's rejection of those three offers not as a victory, but as a fatal, unrecoverable mistake. He rejected the only means to make mankind universally happy.
He calls the temptations a marvelous prophecy.
Yes, uniting all the future axiomatic, insoluble problems and contradictions of human nature.
So the temptation offered guaranteed unity, peace, security. But Christ chose the vague, undefined promise of freedom, which men, being dull and unruly as they are by nature, can't even understand.
A freedom they avoid and fear. The Inquisitor views this as the ultimate act of cruelty toward the weak.
So the core philosophical difference is clear. Christ sees freedom as the necessary foundation for true, conscious love.
And the Inquisitor sees freedom as the necessary source of unrest, confusion, and misery. And he is ready to sacrifice his own soul to join the opposition to correct that mistake and provide a material substitute for salvation.
Okay, let's dive deep into those specific criticisms. If Christ's path was idealism, the Inquisitor's correction is total pragmatism, built on the three forces Christ rejected. These are his three pillars for universal happiness.
And the first pillar is the most immediate and, I think, devastatingly relevant to our world today, the temptation of bread. It's a direct attack on materialism and the rising atheist movements of Dostoevsky's own era.
Christ refused to turn stones into bread, saying, "Man shall not live by bread alone." But the Inquisitor sees this as unforgivably idealistic.
Because in his words, where is the freedom of choice when men are bribed with bread? He argues that Christ just didn't grasp the full power of hunger.
He says Christ knewest not, it seems, that it was precisely in the name of that earthly bread that the terrestrial spirit would one day rise against, struggle with, and finally conquer thee.
The terrestrial spirit, the practical spirit of negation. It understands that the promise of material security is a more powerful, immediate, and unifying force than any spiritual promise could ever be.
This is a profound prophecy of economic determinism, isn't it? The Inquisitor foretells a future where science and atheism become mankind's mouthpiece, proclaiming that the only sin is poverty.
Yes, they will declare, no more crime, hence no more sin on earth, but only hungry people.
And the banner they'll raise against Christ will be, "Feed us first and then command us to be virtuous."
Absolutely. Dostoevsky is looking ahead to socialist and utilitarian systems that try to reduce all human experience, morality, crime, virtue, to purely material conditions. If everyone is fed, crime disappears, so the spiritual struggle is irrelevant.
And this is where the modern relevance just hits you like a truck. We see this today in the belief that social problems are purely systemic and material, and that the only real solutions are economic. It often completely neglects the moral or spiritual failings of the individual.
Dostoevsky is saying that any system, even a humanitarian or scientific one, that promises to solve suffering solely through guaranteed material means is just repeating that first temptation.
It's the eternal power of the stomach. The Inquisitor predicts this demand for earthly food will destroy Christ's church and raise a new Tower of Babel, but this time built on materialist principles.
And even if this new tower fails, because men lack the collective moral stability that Christ demanded, the failure will be blamed on freedom. The people will get disillusioned and they will come crawling back to the controllers.
They will cry, "Feed us, for they who promised us the fire from heaven have deceived us." And the Inquisitor's promise is just chillingly pragmatic.
It is then that we will finish building their tower for them. For they alone who feed them shall finish it, and we shall feed them in thy name, and lying to them that it is in that name.
The lie. The required deception is the linchpin of the whole system.
Because men will never be able to fairly divide the two among themselves, freedom and bread. They're too weak, too ungrateful, too vicious, so they must lay their freedom down and say, enslave, but feed us.
And the controllers must lie eternally about where the bread comes from, pretending it's from Christ, to justify their rule.
And this first temptation also satisfies what he calls the universal craving for collective worship. Man's chief anxiety isn't finding a personal idol.
No, it's finding that which all others will believe in and consent to bow down to in a mass.
And the banner of earthly bread was the only absolute universal standard that could unify everyone. It satisfies their instinctive need of having a worship in common.
He connects freedom of conscience directly to this problem. He argues that man has no greater anxiety than to find someone to whom he can make over that gift of freedom.
If someone controls their conscience and guarantees their food, even Christ's promised spiritual truth will be forgotten. Man prefers rest and even death to a free choice between good and evil. Christ's idealism, by enlarging freedom, just created unrest, confusion, misery.
So if the first pillar establishes economic tyranny through the lie, the Inquisitor then uses the refusal of the miracle to justify spiritual tyranny. Let's move to that second temptation.
Okay, so in the second temptation, Christ refused to jump from the temple. He could have used that spectacle to guarantee immediate universal faith.
But he wanted unforced free love. Faith from conviction, not from proof.
And the Inquisitor just rejects this completely. He says flatly, men that weak and rebel race, are they also gods to understand thy refusal?
He argues that men are born slaves and nothing more. They seek a sign, a spectacle from God more than they seek God himself. They're just incapable of the spiritual strength Christ demanded.
And this is his most severe condemnation of mankind. He says Christ overestimated man so terribly that it was effectively an act without love.
Without love.
Yes. He knew that if man rejected miracle, he would reject God likewise. And since man cannot exist without miracles, what happens? He'll just invent his own.
The soothsayer's miracles, the old witch's sorcery.
Even if he's an atheist 100 times over. It's the idea that human nature abhors a vacuum of the marvelous. If you take away genuine miracles, people will immediately seek out cheap substitutes, cults, or political messiahs to provide the guaranteed signs they crave.
And that is exactly what the Church corrected.
The Inquisitor proudly states that they built their authority not on Christ's painful choice, but on the three forces he rejected: miracle, mystery, and authority.
And by doing that, they relieved men of the terrible burden of conscience and free choice, which was the source of all their spiritual suffering.
They basically traded the difficult path to salvation for the easy path to satisfaction. The Inquisitor claims that by valuing man so highly, Christ acted without love. But the Church showed love by realizing in such a humble spirit its helplessness, by so mercifully lightening its great burden.
The result is that the weak are now led like a herd of cattle, and they're rejoicing at their freedom from the terrible perplexity Christ laid on them.
It speaks directly to the human aversion to the infinite responsibility that comes with free choice. By providing mystery and authority, the Church gave the people something external, unquestionable, and collective to obey.
And crucially, he claims this obedience is so comforting that the weak can blindly obey, even against the dictates of their conscience. The ultimate comfort isn't just safety, it's the removal of moral accountability.
Yes, the Inquisitor asks Christ, "Didst not we show our great love for humanity? By permitting and remitting for its weak nature every sin, provided it be committed with our authorization." The implication is horrifying.
The institution assumes the guilt. It becomes the scapegoat. It absorbs the sin so the individual remains a happy, morally simplified child.
They are relieved of the torture of having to decide freely for themselves. This creates a population that is happy in both their sin and their obedience because someone else is carrying the spiritual weight for them.
And that is the foundation of his moral system. Administered happiness requires collective moral simplification. Okay, let's transition to the third and final pillar, which addresses man's political and social needs.
The third temptation. This is where Christ refused the kingdoms of the world, Caesar's glaive and purple. He chose spiritual authority over temporal power.
He demanded that his followers achieve unity through voluntary love.
And the Inquisitor believes this was Christ's final, most critical failure to secure peace.
He identifies man's third great affliction as an innate necessity for universal union.
Humanity as a whole has always aspired to unite itself universally. He points to great conquerors like Timur and Genghis Khan, saying they passed across the earth unconsciously expressing the same aspiration. This longing for total unified control is, to him, as fundamental as the need for bread.
Man can't tolerate difference or chaos. By accepting the kingdom, Christ would have established a universal kingdom and secured eternal peace. He would have created one common and harmonious anthill.
And he argues, and who can rule mankind better than those who have possessed themselves of man's conscience and hold in their hand man's daily bread? The combination of all three temptations, bread, signs, and unified authority, is what makes his system irresistible and, he believes, superior to God's plan.
But here is where the monologue becomes a confession, and the critique of the Catholic Church turns into Dostoyevsky's critique of all totalitarian systems. The Inquisitor reveals the ultimate, shocking secret.
He confesses openly to Christ's face that they are not following him.
We are not with thee, but with him, and that is our secret. For centuries have we abandoned thee to follow him, yes, 8 centuries.
They accepted the third gift from the powerful Spirit 800 years ago. They took Rome from him and the glaive of Caesar. They're working to become the sole temporal kings of the earth, but doing it all under the banner of Christ.
This reveals the essential nature of the lie. It's an inverted faith. They are self-aware atheists playing the role of supreme religious leaders.
And the Inquisitor looks forward to the chaos unleashed by Christ's freedom, the centuries of intellectual riot and rebellious free thought.
He predicts that man's attempt to achieve freedom through science and reason, which Dostoevsky saw happening in 19th century Europe, will end in self-destruction and anthropophagy.
We should pause on that term, anthropophagy. It literally means cannibalism, savagery. Dostoevsky is predicting that untethered freedom, once it's exhausted, will result in a total spiritual and moral breakdown of civilization. Men will devour each other, literally or metaphorically.
It's the ultimate consequence of rejecting all authority. A return to primitive barbarism.
And it's only then, when they have exhausted their freedom and their despair is absolute, that the beast will crawl up to us in full submission and lick the soles of our feet.
And here, Dostoevsky uses direct, powerful imagery from the Book of Revelation.
The church will then sit upon the scarlet-colored beast, holding up the golden cup of abomination and filthiness, inscribed with the word mystery. They have fully embraced the Antichrist role, promising material fulfillment through calculated deceit.
And this final, brutal submission will bring about the promised universal kingdom of peace, the anthill.
The Inquisitor tells Christ, "Thou art proud of thine own elect, but thou hast none other but these elect, and we will give rest to all." He suggests Christ only saved a handful of gods, while the church, through deception, will save the millions and hundreds of millions of the weak.
It's utilitarianism on a staggering cosmic scale.
Yes. His system is mathematically more loving if you judge love by the sheer number of people made comfortable. It is the perfect cold logic of atheism applied to governance, where the highest good is the elimination of suffering, even if it requires eternal lies.
And this brings us to the most complex, tragic element of the argument, the moral cost of this universal peace. If the masses are happy, unburdened infants, who pays the price for the lie?
Only the rulers. The 100,000 or 200,000 of their rulers are the miserable ones. They've consciously taken upon themselves the curse of knowledge of good and evil.
They're the only ones who know the system is a fraud, that they aren't with Christ, but with the wise spirit of negation. And they have to maintain that lie eternally for the good of the masses.
And this is the critical separation between Dostoevsky's Inquisitor and just a simple, power-hungry tyrant. He's claiming this deception is itself a profound, self-sacrificial martyrdom.
They endure the truth so the masses can enjoy the lie.
It is the great deception and the great burden. The masses will be happy infants, timid, obedient. The rulers will even permit them to sin, telling them they take all these sins upon ourselves. They become the scapegoats and redeemers.
And the people will joyfully submit their most agonizing secrets to the church, relieved of the torture of having to decide freely for themselves.
They trade moral responsibility for administered happiness. But the Inquisitor's own suffering is rooted entirely in his knowledge of the lie and his atheism.
Right, because when Alyosha hears this account from Ivan, he's in disbelief. He argues the Inquisitor must just be driven by a prosaic thirsting for power.
He suggests his secret must be mere atheism and infidelity, and that his motives can't be pure. Alyosha just can't fathom this degree of altruistic evil.
And Ivan's reply is crucial. He confirms Alyosha's guess, But he completely reframes the meaning of that atheism.
Ivan confirms, "You have guessed rightly there, and it is so, and that is his whole secret." But he immediately adds, "Is this not the acutest sufferings for such a man as he?"
This atheism isn't a luxury. It's his private torment. It's the source of his tragedy.
Exactly. The Inquisitor had spent his youth in the wilderness, eating locusts and roots, suffering the tortures of damnation, while trying to conquer his flesh and become free and perfect. He was initially destined for Christ's small elect.
He was one of the proud and mighty who could have joined Christ's chosen few, the people strong enough to bear freedom.
Yes, but upon realizing humanity's general overwhelming weakness, he awoke from my delusion and refused to serve insanity. He became convinced that only by following the advice of the powerful spirit could the fate of these millions of weak rebels, these half-finished samples of humanity created in mockery, be made tolerable.
Half-finished samples. That phrase is just such a harsh judgment on God's creation itself. Is Dostoyevsky suggesting humanity is fundamentally broken?
It's the ultimate cynical view of God's craftsmanship. If God truly demanded this painful, unachievable freedom, then either humanity is broken or God is cruel. The Inquisitor, unable to accept that God is cruel, concludes that God's standard is simply unworkable for most people.
Therefore, the atheist, the lover of humanity, must step in and take over management.
He accepted the system of lies out of a stubborn, albeit tragic, love for his fellow men.
He's the martyr of atheism. He sacrifices his own potential soul and his belief in Christ's ideal to create earthly happiness for the weak. He consciously chose to follow the adversary, not out of malice, but because he saw Christ's path as unworkable for 99.9% of humanity.
And this choice, to leave the proud few and return to the really humble, accepting the curse of being a liar eternally, is what makes him a tragic figure, not just a simplistic villain. He's fully aware of the moral destruction he's perpetrating, but he does it to make them happy in the short term, guaranteeing the eternal peace of the anthill.
It's an exercise in noble utilitarianism, where the ends of collective comfort justify the means of total spiritual slavery.
After nearly an hour of this ceaseless, passionate monologue revealing the entire dark foundation of his kingdom, the Inquisitor pauses. He waits for a reply, a refutation, even a moment of scorn.
He's demanding logic and reason to defeat his system.
In Christ, the prisoner has listened attentively in silence the entire time, his eyes fixed penetratingly and softly on the old man's face. He refuses to debate, refute, or even speak a single word.
He's already established that his ideal can't be guaranteed by argument or proof. It has to be chosen in freedom.
So the answer that finally comes is not one of logic or theology. It's an act of pure, non-refutable compassion.
Christ rises, slowly and silently approaches the Inquisitor, bends towards him, and
softly kisses the bloodless 40-and-10-year-old lips. This is Christ's sole answer to the indictment that he has no love for weak humanity. It is an act of total, unearned, unconditional acceptance.
And this kiss is the ultimate confrontation, isn't it? Absolute calculated logic meets absolute love. How does the Inquisitor react?
The old man is violently affected. He shudders. There's a convulsive twitch at the corner of his mouth. The intellectual fortress he built, this perfect system of pragmatic atheism, is momentarily shaken by an act of love that his system cannot categorize, defeat, or incorporate.
But the core structure remains. He can't allow this ideal to exist in his ordered, managed world.
No. He opens the door and tells the prisoner, "Go. Return no more. Do not come again. Never, never." He banishes Christ not as a criminal, but as a dangerous ideal that threatens the happiness of the masses.
And Ivan confirms to Alyosha that despite the power of that moment, the Inquisitor's fundamental position is unchanged.
The kiss burns his heart, but the old man remains firm in his own ideas and unbelief. That momentary tremor of feeling did not shatter a lifetime commitment to the lie.
And it is this confirmation that leads to Alyosha's despairing realization. He exclaims, "And you, together with him, you too."
Ivan's own philosophical position is revealed as equally cynical. He recognizes the Inquisitor's tragic logic, even if he keeps a mocking distance. The whole poem ends not with the religious victory, but with the supremacy of this profound yet suffering unbelief.
Dostoyevsky leaves you with this sense of radical despair. He presents an impossible dichotomy, either the impossible suffering freedom of Christ, which only the strong can bear,
or the managed, lying happiness of the Inquisitor, which guarantees comfort for the masses. And Ivan, the atheist, argues that the most intelligent people, the ones who truly love humanity, are the ones forced to join the party of the devil to achieve earthly order.
So this deep dive has really shown us Dostoyevsky's masterful technique. He uses a religious framework, the second coming, the temptations, to debate purely secular, political, and psychological questions.
Questions about human government, materialism, and the need for universal control. The Inquisitor represents the seductive, perennial power of systems, whether they're religious, totalitarian, socialist, or even technologically deterministic. That promise guaranteed peace in exchange for our freedom.
The Inquisitor is an eternal figure.
Absolutely. Every time a system promises to eliminate uncertainty, to provide total security, or to remove the burden of painful choices by demanding we trust in its singular authority, we see the shadow of the cardinal.
He forces us to ask ourselves whether we are among the proud and mighty few who can endure freedom, or if we are truly the happy infants who would readily trade difficult choice for a comfortable managed existence.
Even if we know that existence is based on a calculated lie.
The ultimate message, delivered through Ivan the Atheist, is that freedom is painful. Love must be free, but because it's free, it's inherently unstable, confusing, and results in terrible suffering.
But to exchange that painful freedom for security is to commit an eternal lie. A lie, however, that is a profound act of self-sacrifice by the rulers who carry the burden of conscience so others don't have to.
And this brings us back to the final unresolved tension. The Inquisitor, knowing the lie, knowing that burning Christ would solidify his deception and remove any threat, still chooses to release him.
He says, "If there ever was one who deserved more than any of the others our inquisitorial fires, it is thee." And yet he lets him go.
So if his mission was truly to protect the unity of the lie for the sake of humanity's happiness, wouldn't burning Christ have been the most logical, functional action? His own pragmatic atheism should have demanded it. So why the release?
The silent kiss. That single, unconditional gesture of love demonstrated a capacity within Christ's ideal that the Inquisitor's cold, calculated logic just couldn't account for. The kiss burns his heart, demonstrating a crack in his fortress. It proves that even a lifelong commitment to the lie cannot entirely suppress the human or perhaps divine capacity for unconditional love.
So by releasing him, he acts against the supreme logic of his own system,
proving that his stubborn love for humanity may in the end still contain a flicker of the very thing he sought to destroy, genuine freedom.
So the provocative thought we'll leave you with is this. If the Inquisitor's love for humanity was indeed stubborn and genuine, why was a single act of radical, non-judgmental love the one thing he could not incorporate into his system? Was the kiss the one element of Christ's message that refused to be managed or controlled, and therefore the only enduring threat to his perfect, calculated anthill?
Something to ponder as you navigate your own complicated path between the demands of freedom and the seductive promises of guaranteed comfort. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.